today we're going to be jumping into Synth1 and our quest to master the Synth1. We've talked about sub-bass, and I think we're pretty much done with sub-bass. We're going to be moving on over here to the sine wave. Now you might be going, wait a second, we've just talked a ton about the sine wave, but we've been talking about specifically the sub-bass, not the sine wave. The sine wave still has a ton of useful information, and we can get at that information using Burgessian analysis. Remember those 6 aspects of sound? We have tonality, so we have flux, low flux, and I also refer to low flux as static, as in things are not changing within our sound. We have tonality and atonality, meaning a sound can be played chromatically to make a melody or influence harmony, versus atonality, which would not do that. And then we also have length, as in short and long. So we've got 6 aspects of sound. And I want to, because we're going to be using these now to look at something, we need to dive a little bit deeper in what it means to use these tools. So for example, let's say we have a short sound. Let's say it's the sound. We could say, oh, well, that's a short sound. Now you could also say, well, this is a sound with a lot of flux because it turns on and turns off very quickly. It's changing. It's got a lot of flux. And so you might be saying, well, then what's the point of having short as a category and long as a category? And this is where hopefully I blow your mind. It's not that mind blowing, I don't think. But to avoid this confusion, do not confuse the technique with the idea. The 6 aspects of sound are modes of thought. They are not techniques. They reveal techniques. They influence what we should do to a sound, but they are not the techniques themselves. So we could look at it from a short point of view or from a changing point of view, a flux point of view. Now length is an interesting one, because you'll notice I don't have things like soft and loud as part of my aspects of sound, because they're pretty hard to think of as points of view. But length is sort of a bit special because length has global length, as in the note is globally this long, like the whole note, like there it is, and then there it is. So we have the start and the stop, and it's globally that long. That's how long that note is. But then we have pieces of the note, developmental parts of the note that are less like that. For example, our attack phase on this note, how fast our note turns on, is very fast. It has a locally short attack. But if I turn it up, let's say quite far, we could now say we have a locally long attack. And so we can get sounds that are globally short, but they're locally long. So we're going to be talking about this. But anyways, that's why that's included as mode of thought. And we'll, again, talk about this as we progress further into this series. So I have been working on this book. I've got the next couple videos sort of figured out. And yeah, just been editing the snot out of this and making it as great as I possibly can. I'll be using it to reference, just to keep myself on track throughout these videos. But again, the book is provided in the download and the description for download for free, as is normal. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we're going to be talking, so to use our 6 aspects of sound, right, we can sort of do a general synopsis real quick. Like, okay, let's go down our list. We have flux, a sine wave with a lot of flux. That's great for like a kick sound, right? So if I have this sine wave and then I bend it down really fast, it will sound more like a kick. Now, if I had a sine wave that is static, like it is right now, and let's say we have a short sound, well, that's great for like pluck leads or just any kind of a lead. And we could use it to create chords and harmonies and do all sorts of things. So that's, now we're not mixing things yet. We're keeping them we're trying to keep them separate from each other. It's pretty hard to do because they're modes of thought. We also have, right now, we already sort of talked about length. So now we've got a general overview. Now we're going to dive a little bit more into the ADSR envelope. We got to look at another piece of this synth. And we're going to slowly sort of begin to explore the rest of this synthesizer and the options there are for us. But the amplifier here is of particular interest to us. So if we come down here, I've listed a couple examples of just tracks that are literally composed of nothing but sine waves. And so it's pretty interesting. They make the drums, they make the hi-hat using a vocoder of all things, which I think is a really interesting and cool way of doing it. And then there's also a sine wave scratch effect that I found amusing by a guy called Mad Zach from DJ tech tools. And so he has some pretty cool, I think, interesting ways of making some cool sounds. And so you can go check it out, get creative. So, all right. Oh yeah, I want to mention this too here. We have two perspectives for looking at our sound when we look at them from these views. There's a mixing perspective, how is that going to achieve a certain quality of sound? We are interested in EQ moves, compression, things that make our music sound a particular way. And then we also have composition. This composition is not giving a living crap about mixing. And then as a good composer, we'll have like a good feel for both of them and be able to satisfy them both easily. Or one will be so powerful as to make the other one not matter. And so I talk a little bit more about that in here. But basically, when we are doing sound design, we are chiefly concerned with composition. We want to make sounds that are musical or fulfill a purpose that will bring a point across. And so, I mean, we could really get into philosophy here as far as like what's the sound's job and stuff. But anyways, just letting you know, when we make a lot of these decisions, don't worry too much about the mixing. It will come up. We will mention it. We should be conscious of it, but we don't want it to be the driving force of what we're doing. So, okay, ADSR, long, short. There are actually a ton of kind of envelopes, but we've been talking about these 4 letters, ADSR, like you know what they are, and you may not know. So ADSR stands for attack, decay, sustain, release. Attacks, how fast our sound turns on. I mean, like, heck, let's go right here. So we have attack. So if we have a short attack, turns on very quick. Long attack turns on very short, as you could see. Still turning on. Okay, so we've got our attack. We've also got our decay, which is after it's reached our attack, how long it takes to reach our sustain. So before we talk about decay, let's talk about sustain. Sustain, if you're playing the flute and you blow into it and you make a note, there's going to be a level at which it continues to ring as long as you blow into the flute. And so, I mean, how fast you blow, or I'm not really sure what the proper term is, but how hard you blow into the flute will determine how loud it is at that particular note. And so the sustain is that level. But there's got to be a transition from the attack. Maybe our flute goes bow, bow, something like that, right? Well, then there's going to be a decay point to our sustain. It's got to get softer to reach our sustain. And so the decay determines that transition time. How long does it take to get from attack to sustain? So as long as I'm holding down the note, it sustains. Now you notice here we got this whooshing effect. And that happens when our decay is shorter than our attack. If our decay is increased in time, we get more of a whoa. But if we have our decay shorter, it's go whoa. We'll look at this more. I'm just giving you a general idea. Decay's job is to get attack to the sustain. That's all that's going on. And then we also have a release. This is how, after I let go of my note, you can see it continues. I try to let go quite obviously. I let go now. You see it continues to ring. If I turn this to 0, I let go now. And it stops. And so this is our release determines that. And then we also have gain and velocity, which we'll talk about more in a second. So, okay, that's what's going on generally here. I mean, that's like your 101, what's happening. Most of the time, this is not very friendly in that it's just a set of knobs. So you can't really see what's happening. But a lot of times, envelopes are represented like this. And you can have, sometimes they'll add in this hold phase. So we'll have, they also have a delay phase, which I always have found interesting. You normally don't end up using it. But we have attack, hold, decay, sustain, release. So there's this holding period before we decay to our sustain value, which we remain at until we let go, and then it executes the rest of the envelope. Things like Harmer usually have a little line that shows up showing you where in the envelope you are. And you can see as I let go, it continues on. So it goes through and you can hear it. It's very visual, and that's a great way of learning. So let's go ahead. We haven't talked about what an envelope is, though. You might be going, okay, well, now I know what the letters mean. What the heck is this envelope thing all about? So coming back over here. Okay, we have all these different kinds of envelopes. And an envelope is simply it's just the way in audio we say we are controlling something with something else. So I compare it. So that's just what an envelope means. So you're controlling one parameter or one thing with another signal. And we call these controlling signals. And we generate them using ADSR. So there's a whole bunch of different types of envelopes. There's actually envelopes that aren't ADSR at all. We have ramp envelopes and envelope followers and a bunch of other kinds of envelopes. But all they are controller signals that are intended to change our sound in a meaningful way. And in our case, it's called an amplifier because it's specifically controlling the volume. If you were to take this ADSR envelope out of Synth1 and just place it wherever you wanted, it could control a lot of other things, and it would just be called an envelope, like it is as in every other sense. So here we've got an envelope, and this is the volume envelope. This one controls the volume. We actually just looked at this one. This is a menu from Reactor. I mean, we could just have envelopes controlling all sorts of things. And then this one's the Synth1 envelope. So, okay, that's all interesting. And we notice here Massive has a different kind of envelope, and they've also got this morphing option at the end. And we see we've got several of them. So Synth1, because it puts it in a specific spot, we have to use it where it gives us. It's specifically for the volume. That's just where they put it in the signal chain. We can't move it around. These other ones are more flexible. So we say, okay, we're going to be just focusing on regular ADSR because that's the one available to us in Synth1. So here I explain a little bit about an envelope, and I go down this analogy, which I think is a pretty good analogy. The sprinklers around your house. You have a sprinkler system, right? Maybe you don't. Maybe you live in the desert or someplace you just don't have sprinklers. But anyways, let's just pretend you've got sprinklers around your house. You could set an alarm in the morning to remind you to go turn the sprinklers on. And so you set this alarm, you wake up, you go turn the sprinklers on. And then you need to set another alarm to remind you to turn them off because you don't want to pay a water bill that's ridiculous. So maybe you use a hose instead and you're out there. I don't know. But then when your alarm goes off, you go and turn it off. And you have to set another alarm to go and turn it on the next day. Or maybe you're going to turn it on at night. And that just sucks. So you come up with a plan. You say, I got a better way. I'm going to automate this process. I'm going to get a timer. I'm going to attach all my sprinklers to this timer. And the timer will just automatically turn stuff on and off, according to how I set it up. So you set it up so that it turns on automatically in the morning. It's great. I mean, there you go. You've automated it. In essence, you've created an envelope. There you go. You've got an envelope. Now you could get a lot more complicated now. Now you could say, I can do more intricate things now. For example, maybe you've had your sprinklers going for 30 minutes in the morning and you want to see what would happen if you did it instead every hour for 5 minutes on the hour. So you have 5 minutes and you want to see maybe that'll make your water growth better or something. So you try it out and you can do it easily because you've got a timer. You just program your timer and boom, you got it. So we're able to do these more interesting things. Maybe your timer is broken and your sprinklers are just turning on and off randomly, or they won't turn off or something. Well, you would notice that and you would say, something's wrong with the controlling signal. Something's happened there. So that's the analogy of envelopes. Envelopes are very similar. They're like, here's the automation. Turn our sound on, as we see from our attack. Turn on, turn on, turn on. Turn off a little bit, turn off a little bit. Sustain, 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 stay sustaining. When we release the note, we turn it off. We are not sitting with our hand on a volume knob doing this manually, which in synths that don't have envelopes, that's what you would have to do. Some synths, they just, if you get any sort of a modular synth and you don't have some sort of controlling signal to control the amplitude, you're going to have it just ring on and on and on forever. And you would have to do this manually. So it is a thing. So I think it's a pretty clear analogy. Hopefully you get it. So what we're dealing with here, there's something stuck in my teeth. Okay. What we're dealing with here is an envelope generator. So that's generating an envelope. It doesn't need to be an ADSR. It just happens to be an ADSR in our case. And then we've already talked about why it's labeled an amplifier. Okay, so here I sort of talk about just the different stages. So we've got attack. We've already sort of looked at these. Attack, though, each one of these knobs it can be an art form sometimes, trying to get this thing to be just right. And that's what I want to try and demonstrate. There's lots of videos explaining very easily what it does. I mean, we've already talked about it, You want to, for example, let's just do some general contours, I guess, to warm up for just a second. So let's say we want a sound that's like a pluck-based sound. And so we think, okay, well, what's the contour? Contour just means shape. What's the shape of the volume envelope of the sound? Well, let's try singing it. We go boom, and we say, okay, well, we've got a very fast attack, so let's make our attack fast, and then boom, boom. Okay, so we've got this short. I'm like, I don't know why I'm thinking about this so hard. We've got a very short decay and almost no sustain. So let's just get rid of the sustain and decay. And then our release, you know, we've clearly got this ending portion. So we're going to have some sort of a release like that. Oh, our release is too short. That's the thing sometimes with these sorts of things. Oh, you know what? We need to bring our decay up. There we go. Okay, so let's really quick talk about what happened right there. So if we do this, our attack is decaying to our release, which release triggers from our sustain value. If our sustain value never happens and our attack never increased from anything because our decay value never went up, then our release is gonna just not do anything. So we need our decay value to be up so that our attack has something to rise to. If our sustain is down, it's got nothing to rise to. And you'll also see envelopes. This is technically like an attack release envelope. It's a little bit confusing in an ADSR setting, but you'll see things like AD envelopes. So anyways, we are going to increase in value, and then we're going to release. And our release is actually kind of long. We can make our decay a bit bigger. And you can see at this point, our decay essentially controls how loud our signal is. Controls the maximum height. So say there we go, we got our pluck sound. Maybe we don't want something with that long of a release. So cool. Okay, we got that. Now let's try, okay, let's think of another easy shape. Well, I want a sound that has a strong attack, but can ring out. So we can just bring our sustain up. And now we could do like vibrato or other musical effects to it. So, all right. So anyways, you see, these are pretty straightforward controls when we're dealing with them in just general contour development, meaning we're just making specific shapes. It's not that hard. And a lot of sounds, you can approximate very easily the contour of them. However, when you get into more advanced sound design, and especially distortion-based sound design, this can become a lot more nuancey. Things are not so clearly laid out. And so I want to talk about some of those things, some of the things that just aren't usually mentioned. All right. So I also wanted to note here, so attack controls the maximum amplitude. Usually we just saw a case where if our attack is down and our sustain is down, the decay actually would determine that. It's that was an interesting case. But usually the attack will have a role in that. In some envelopes, like Harmer, you saw I'm able to just drag points around. Those are totally different kinds of envelopes. We're not going to mention them, but they work on a totally different principle because of the way they're set up. They offer way more control. So we have the ability for our attack sound to do some interesting things, and it's triggered when we play a note. When we hit a note, it activates. It's pretty straightforward. At first glance, this seems very easy to grasp completely. And then we just did a couple of those. But you'll run into some interesting things with this knob, especially as we add more processing. I want to point these things out here because I rarely ever see them considered in text or tutorials. Okay, so if our attack knob is set around 40 to 100 milliseconds, you're going to miss the chiff of your sample. For example, if I come in here, just grab a kick sound and just set our attack. Okay, so here's our kick sound first. There it is. If I just set this just a little bit, I am hitting the same kick sound and you can barely hear it. So our attack is doing some interesting things here. We say, now here I point out the phase relationship, but we're actually going to talk about the length of note as well later. But largely, the frequencies responsible for the punch of the kick happen at the chiff. So when we shave this off by fading it in, we've essentially removed a great deal of the character of the sound. This could be really useful for layering if perhaps you like the way a sample ends, but not the way it starts. You could perhaps shave off half of the sound, part of the sound using an envelope, and just add the other part in using another sample and just layer it in. Very easy. However, this also changes the phase relationship. In a hefty, I'm actually gonna do a video specifically about this, but a a lot of effects have envelope followers they use to process the sound. And so we're going to be looking at this more later, but because of this, if you change the contour of your sound, running it through some pretty complicated processing, sometimes, usually it's not that big a deal, but sometimes you'll wind up with just a totally different sound, especially if you're messing with the fundamental frequency. And if your sound is based on a very specific phase relationship, this can really mess with it. So you might check this. I normally don't have this problem, but every now and then it will crop up. So just something for you to be aware of. You want to be careful because if you fade it in, you're going to be changing how another plugin down the chain may see the spectrum at the beginning, and that may influence how it processes sound that comes after it. Okay, so these are more applicable to short sounds than long sounds. But essentially, this is a filter. And so this first comment has to do with phase as it relates to amplitude. We're simply changing the amplitude by fading it in. Our thing should still ideally be in phase. However, different envelopes actually use different processes to create the fade. And sometimes in this process, they will actually create a small phase shift within the actual fading up of the audio. And so that is something that we just need to be aware of. And then finally, move stack. And we've already sort of talked about this, but as you add more and more things, the decision to put that fade at the beginning at this here, at this envelope, the decision to turn this knob matters more, especially if you have like 12 crazy effects or processing after. Moving this knob after making those decisions can oftentimes change a lot of things. And so you'll come back here and sometimes reset this knob. Now, I say 95, but it's like 97% of the time, you're going to set this knob, just use your ears, and then you're fine after that. You're good. You might come back and then begin to mess with it creatively, maybe one or two more times, and finally set on a value you really like. But for the most part, that's what you're going to do. You don't need to overthink it. These are just additional things that if you hear something go wrong, you can look at this and identify it, or maybe you're trying to do a very specific kind of sound design. And in that case, you may want to think a little more carefully about what you're doing. So, now over here, so we have our decay, and I lay out a sound right here. So we see here's the attack. This is a Chapman stick bass note, and it's a very fast attack. As we could see, there's a decay stage, a stage where we don't really decay that much. It sustains for the most part, and then we drop off very quickly. Our release stage is actually very fast. This middle portion can be attributed to the release, but it's actually sort of not also. You could consider it two ways. And a lot of times this is self-evident when we finally get to approaching this. So we're not going to worry too much about that right now. Okay, so anyways, we got all that. We understand envelopes quite a bit better now. And we have sustain, release. So sustain, right, that's just the level we ring out at. I'll let you read and really get the in-depth version. And then we have our release, how long after we let go of the note. This can have quite severe impacts on after the processing of our sound, especially in the context of distortion. And it can also be used very fancily with the implication of acoustic space and the use of reverb, delay, and chorus, which are all things we will devote and look at in later sections. But now we get an idea of what these things are controlling. And we're going to do some exercises in this lesson itself. Okay. Many additional effects generators allow you to guide them in how they let you change the sound. So if we change the contour of our sound at the generation stage of the signal chain, so that's the whole thing I was talking about, where after we've made a bunch of decisions, go back, check that out. We also have these two extra knobs. We have gain and velocity, okay? And we could look at them. Okay, so they both affect playability, and they're very simple. Gain is basically just the gain knob, but we're setting it at the amplifier stage. Or at least it looks that way. I have no reason to believe it's happening anywhere else. Because of this, it has a special role in setting the maximum value our ADSR envelope can reach. Let me pull out Harmor one more time. It's back here. You see how this top point basically when we change the gain, it's like we're bringing this point down. It's not exactly like that. All the other points technically move too, but it's like we're bringing it down. So that is how I want you to look at this gain knob. We have a fader up here. First of all, we have a rotary fader, and then we also have a linear fader here. So because we have those faders, we don't want to look at this as just the volume knob of the instrument. It's early in the signal chain. This knob is more important than that. So it's better to look at it from a sound design perspective. Okay. And then we also have, along with our ADSR, we also have this velocity knob, which basically when we hit a note, velocity is a physics term, right? It's a magnitude with a direction. And I know that sounds really fancy, but basically when you hit a key, you're applying a force downward on that key. Some keyboards are velocity sensitive. If you hit the key harder, the key will sound the envelope louder, meaning it will upscale all the points. So this point, the attack will be brought up, will reach a higher gain level, and these likewise stages will also increase in level. The length will remain constant, but the level will increase. If we bring our velocity sensitivity down to 0, no matter how hard or soft we hit the key, it will play at the same volume level. If we bring it all the way up, it will respond a lot if our keyboard is velocity sensitive. So if you have a keyboard whose sensitivity kind of sucks but is somewhat useful, you could bring it down and hopefully find a nice middle ground. Normally, I don't have to mess with this. So anyways, there are those two knobs, very easy. And then we get into this idea of retriggering. Okay, so I guess we'll dive into retriggering real quick. Retriggering is sort of it could be quite the subject. In Synth1, it's really easy. Our envelopes always retrigger. So here's the question, right? I'm over here. I'm playing a note. Let's bring our sustain up. So there's my note. I'm playing a note. And then I hit another note while that note is still playing. The question Synth1 has to answer is, when I hit that new note, does it use the envelope it's already made? So should that sound just come in with our previous sound? Or should it generate a new envelope and resound the attack individually for that sound? And the answer is that's called retriggering. It retriggers the envelope to bring in the next sound. We can clearly hear an attack sound on our new sound. And so sometimes, okay, so that's called retrigger, but a lot of synths, retrigger is actually kind of a complicated ordeal. And I linked some articles that talk about it a little bit more, like Synth Secrets really just, they have 2 sections on it. It's quite in depth. Monarch has pretty extensive retrigger options. I mean, it's got 3 options, but Monarch's also mono. But you'll see options that describe specific retriggering behavior covered in things like mono and legato. So for example, mono, if my 2 notes are overlapping, we get that. But if I do legato, we notice it doesn't have that same bump, 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 bump. That's because mono is basically retriggering our envelope, whereas legato is picking up where our envelope already was. So they both only allow you to play 1 note, but one does retrigger and one doesn't. Versus. So you can see that's totally different feel to the synth. So you'll see synths with that, and that's pretty much what these knobs do. We're going to talk about more of this later, but that's also what these little boxes down here let you know. First off, these boxes let you know how many voices are sounding. We'll talk about that when we get to voices. And they also let you know which envelope is active. So for example, if I hit 2 notes, we see 2 envelopes are active. And if I hit another note, it activates a new envelope. If I hit mono, well, I'm not really sure how it would tell you a new envelope's been activated in mono. But you can see the envelopes that are currently doing a job. And you see that at most there's only ever 1 envelope active. This is mostly, I'm not really sure what this would be really useful for. It's cool. I like it. I think it's cool. I'd rather have it than not have it. Keeps me CPU conscious is what I thought of it was for. But large after that, I'm not really sure. I don't know. It's not really necessary, but it's cool. And that's what we're going to leave it at for now. So we've talked a ton about this. We're going to be doing exercises and stuff, but this should have answered any questions, any basic questions about what an envelope is, a reason you would use it, what they stand for, and other types of envelopes that can potentially exist. Because I mean, those are all discussions all on their own. And a lot of these discussions can get way more technical than I want to, personally. So there you have it. Here's a number of people who talk about envelopes. Some of these are just great video descriptions. ImageLine's got a thing. There's lots of great sources out there. So this is the bare bones. In order to really solidify this in your own understanding, go through and really mess with it. I have a little example here where would be, I guess it's not on this video, in this template. Anyways, we're going to be looking at a much more complicated scenario later on where I made a lot of sound design decisions, and I'll be using a different synth for some of it because it's just a little more straightforward. And then we'll be able to apply those techniques in Synth1 because, Synth1 is not the most straightforward when it comes to learning some of these tools. Like the envelope is completely hidden when in reality, we're really messing with this. So it's just got different controls. And they don't tell you the tension. That's like a whole nother discussion. I might just ignore it and just accept the way it sounds. But you see how we can bend this up and down, concavity? Well, they don't tell us about that in Synth1. For all I know, it's changing when we turn the knob dynamically. Like, I just don't know. So who knows? I don't know. You don't know. We could do some experiments and figure it out, but I don't think it's worth our time. So if you have any questions about this stuff, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.